Weapons, money, and humanitarian aid. What assistance did the West provide to Ukraine in 2022? 2022 was a turning point in Ukraine's relations with international partners and allies. Russia's full-scale invasion of the territory of our country has significantly affected Ukraine's relations with the United States, Great Britain, the European Union, Israel, and other states, as well as the provision of financial and military assistance to Kyiv from these countries. Thus, last year the United States of America allocated $18.6 billion to Ukraine. And at the end of December, the Senate of the U.S. Congress approved the draft budget of the country for the next fiscal year, which includes assistance to Ukraine. During 2023, Kyiv will receive $44.9 billion. Since the beginning of the Russian aggression, the European Union and its financial institutions have allocated about €19.7 billion only to support the economy of the financial system and the social sphere of Ukraine. The European Union also provides Ukraine with significant military assistance. For the first time in its history, the EU finances the purchase and delivery of weapons, military equipment to a country that is not a member of the European Union, and which, moreover, is at war. Great Britain is one of the first countries that supported Ukraine after Russia's full-scale military aggression. For more than 10 months of a full-scale invasion, London sent thousands of pieces of military equipment, millions of dollars of financial assistance. In addition, the UK continues to impose sanctions against Russian companies, banks, oligarchs, and lobby for the interests of Ukraine on all international platforms. USA. Of the nearly $45 billion provided in the 2023 U.S. state budget for Ukraine, $13.4 billion will be directed to economic and budgetary support for Ukraine, including the cost of restoring critical infrastructure after the shelling of peaceful cities by the Russian army. $28.5 billion will be directed to military assistance, in particular, to provide the Ukrainian army with equipment, weapons, and ammunition. Almost $5 billion more will be allocated for humanitarian aid to Ukrainians. In addition, on October 1 last year, the historic U.S. Lend-Lease law for Ukraine came into force, which removes bureaucratic obstacles to the supply of military aid to Kyiv. At the same time, U.S. President Joseph Biden received expanded powers to provide weapons. According to U.S. State Department spokesperson Andrea Kaelin, Lend-Lease is one of the mechanisms for transferring weapons, equipment, and military equipment to Ukraine. According to her, there are various ways to provide military assistance. We use a mechanism that gives what Ukraine needs now for a successful struggle. The weapons provided by the U.S. Department of Defense proved to be the most effective this year, and the Ukrainian military could use them very successfully. In particular, we saw an effective counteroffensive by the Ukrainian army. At the moment, we have very close contacts with our colleagues from the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and the Office of the President. We were all in Bucharest and discussed the situation in Ukraine, what kind of help could be given. Such meetings in NATO, in the Ramstein format, at the G7 and G20 are very important, because we can hear from the Ukrainian side what they need and convey what they need to Ukraine, said Andrea Kaelin. Great Britain. Since February 24, the UK has provided Ukraine with a total of about $2 billion in military aid, and about $1 billion in financial assistance to the Ukrainian state budget in the form of loans, grants, guarantees, and other financial instruments. Among the weapons that the British handed over to the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, are NLAW anti-tank grenade launchers, multiple rocket launchers, armored vehicles, anti-ship, anti-tank weapons, drones, artillery shells, military ammunition. Atlantic Council researcher Peter Dickinson noted that London's decision to support Kyiv was influenced by the fact that the events that began to take place in Ukraine reminded the British of the beginning of World War II. He stressed that the British are very proud that then their country was fundamentally opposed to Hitler, and believe that Ukraine should also confront Putin, who is today's Hitler. Dickinson is sure that Brexit, the exit of Great Britain from the European Union, also played a big role in supporting Ukraine. After him, there were a lot of critics who claimed that Britain ceased to exist as a country and lost its international influence. And it was very important for British politicians to show that Great Britain still remains one of the leaders of the world community, and can take a decisive position, which it took after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. People believe that this is the right position, and we must continue to do so. Assistance to Ukraine is supported by both major parties, the party in power, the Conservatives, and the Labour Party, which is now in opposition, said Peter Dickinson. European Union. On December 10, the EU Council approved the provision of assistance to Ukraine in the amount of €18 billion during 2023. The EU money will be used to cover the state budget deficit, in particular, for salaries, pensions, compensation for internally displaced persons, as well as the closure of other expenditure items. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, the total military assistance provided by the European Union and its member states to Ukraine is €8 billion, or about 45% of the amount Kyiv receives from the United States. In mid-December, the leaders of the EU countries agreed to increase military support for Ukraine, and also agreed to continue work to hold Russia accountable for war crimes. Violeta Moskalew, Ph.D., founder of the Global Ukraine Foundation, believes that the EU countries decided to provide military assistance to Ukraine for three reasons. The first is that after the published facts of the terrible crimes of the Russian army in Ukraine, in particular, the photo of the consequences of the massacre in Bucha, the policy of most countries regarding military assistance to Ukraine began to change. The second is the gas blackmail that the Russian Federation arranged for European countries in the summer. And the third reason is the massive rocket bombing of Ukraine, which has been going on since October. Every time Russia raises the stakes and does more terrible things in Ukraine, it increases the motivation of European and Western partners to help more and more. And I have no doubt that the same France will support Ukraine until victory, until Russia pays all reparations and until war criminals are held accountable, Violeta Moskalew said. To date, France's share in the supply of weapons to Ukraine is less than 2%. But it has transferred 18 Caesar self-propelled artillery mounts, which is a quarter of France's mobile artillery. In addition, France and Italy approved Ukraine's request for the supply of Mamba air defense systems. Paris also donated 100 generators, fire and rescue vehicles, ambulances, medical equipment and pontoon bridges to Kyiv. According to Violeta Moskalew, France provides Ukraine with not only military, but also humanitarian aid. In particular, ordinary French people participate in many organizations to collect humanitarian aid and money for Ukraine, and also host Ukrainian families. By the end of 2022, about 120 to 130,000 Ukrainian refugees remained in France. The state also provided certain resources for refugees, offered places to live, provided financial assistance in the region of about €420 per person. This amount is at least enough for basic necessities. The state is also trying to encourage the French to host Ukrainians. It gives financial assistance to those families who have hosted people from Ukraine for 3 or more months, Moskalew said. Germany for 2023 additionally allocated €1 billion from its state budget to help Ukraine. The money will be used to protect the country from Russian cyber attacks and to collect evidence of war crimes by the Russian army. Germany is Ukraine's third largest military donor, albeit far behind the United States, whose arms supplies have played a crucial role in the success of the Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefields. Ukraine's budget makes it clear that our support goes far beyond important and necessary arms deliveries. We are investing heavily in peace in Europe and Ukraine, said Robin Wagener, head of the German-Ukrainian Parliamentary Group. At the same time, Andreas Umland, a German political scientist and analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, believes that Germany, due to pacifist sentiments in society and politics, is not the best partner in military cooperation. I expected more, and most importantly, that it all come faster. Often, deliveries were delayed for reasons that are not entirely clear, in particular, anti-aircraft installations could have been transferred earlier. But better late than never. I think that over time, German assistance will also increase as Ukraine requests more of it. Militarily, Germany is not the best partner, it does not have a strong army, and it is such a pacifist country. Therefore, in this regard, it is difficult with her, said the political scientist. Umland explained that the turning point in Germany's decision to increase military aid to Ukraine was the massive rocket attacks on Ukrainian cities that began in mid-October. These terrorist attacks, missile attacks on Ukrainian cities to destroy infrastructure, it was such a shock that for Germany it became an important factor in the fact that it toughened its rhetoric and continues to supply weapons and other equipment. According to the German Interior Ministry, in the country now has about 162,000 registered Ukrainians who fled Ukraine because of the war. Germany is among the leaders of those countries that accepted the citizens of Ukraine, Umland stated. Poland was one of the first countries to promptly accept Ukrainian refugees who fled their country due to missile attacks from the Russian Federation. As noted by the Polish historian, international expert Łukasz Adamski, the position of the Polish government is aimed at supporting Ukraine as much as possible both economically and militarily. According to Adamski, Poland received the very first wave of Ukrainian refugees who arrived from Ukraine immediately after the start of the war. The main motivation for helping Ukraine, according to the expert, is the understanding of the threats to the security of Poland itself. Adamski is confident that if Russia wins this war, the Poles will be next, and not because of a direct attack by the Russian army. After the victory in Ukraine, the Russian Federation will want to challenge NATO on the territory of the Baltic countries, and this is already a conflict that will directly involve Poland. Therefore, we spend 0.5% of GDP on supporting both Ukrainian refugees and Ukraine in the war against the Russian Federation. Only Estonia and Latvia have a higher figure. The United States renders in absolute numbers much more assistance to Ukraine than Poland. But if you look at the percentage, then in the US 0.2%, in the UK 0.3%, in Poland 0.5%. Even in absolute numbers, Poland, together with Canada, ranks third in the world in support of Ukraine, said Łukasz Adamski. The share of Poland in the supply of military aid to Ukraine is 22%. In particular, according to Reuters, the state company PGZ supplied Ukraine with artillery and mortar systems, body armor, small arms and ammunition. In turn, the Czech Republic in 2022 provided assistance to Ukraine in 3 key areas: military, social and humanitarian, and political. Military assistance to the Czech Republic is more than $4 billion. The second is a social issue, these are Ukrainian refugees and humanitarian aid. And the third is a political moment, moderation at the level of the European Union and Central Europe. This is an alliance between Prague and Warsaw, which works at the EU level and lobbies for the interests of Ukraine from candidate status to the start of negotiations on joining the European Union. And in the same context, there is an impact on countries such as Hungary, to convince Viktor Orban, the pro-Russian Prime Minister of Hungary, to calm down a little or to more adequately assess the position, as well as work with Germany, said the director of the Institute for Central European Strategy Dmitry Tuzansky. In turn, Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala announced the allocation of financial assistance to Ukraine in the amount of €8.5 million for the passage of the autumn-winter season. Appropriate equipment will also be allocated for these purposes. And besides this, according to Fiala, the Czech Republic will finance the construction of the points of invincibility for €2.5 million, and another €1 million will be directed to support the medical sector in Ukraine. Estonia has been helping Ukraine not since 2022, but since 2014. According to Professor of International Law Yevgen Sibulenko, in terms of the amount of assistance provided to our country in relation to GDP, Estonia has been ranked first all these years. For some time, Latvia was ahead of its neighbors in this indicator, but recently the Estonians again came out on top. Estonia is the only country in the world that spends more than 1% of GDP on helping Ukraine. And if we look directly at military aid, Estonia is again in first place. This is also about 1%. But the most interesting thing is not even this. If we take absolute numbers, then in total aid Estonia now occupies somewhere in the 15th place, and in military aid a 11th. This is despite the fact that the population of Estonia is 1.3 million people, which is less than half of pre-war Kyiv. And in February and March, when the war had just entered a large-scale phase, Estonia was already in absolute terms in second place after the United States in terms of military aid, the professor informed. In addition, as Sibulenko pointed out, Estonia ranks third per capita in accepting Ukrainian refugees. This is despite the fact that Estonia does not even border Ukraine. More than 120,000 Ukrainian refugees passed through Estonia, while about half, 64,000, remained in the country. For Ukrainian children, in addition to the fact that they study in Estonian schools, both a school and a separate gymnasium were created. And at the initial stage, Estonia accepted refugees with a minimum of documents, often only 40 copies were enough. That is why so many people who fled through Russia from the occupied territories, they passed through Estonia, said Yevgen Sibulenko. As for Latvia, since the beginning of a full-scale war, this country has transferred weapons and equipment worth more than €300 million to Ukraine. This military assistance includes howitzers, drones, helicopters, anti-tank weapons and other weapons and military equipment. Deputy of the Latvian Seimas Ainars Latkovskis recalled that Latvia, along with Lithuania and Estonia, as well as the United States, Great Britain and Poland, were the first countries that began to provide military assistance to Ukraine even before the full-scale war. The Stingers we handed over the day before the Russian attack helped a lot to break up the Russian Special Forces units that were supposed to land at the airport. The fact that we could help at a time when this help was still lacking is very important. Now many countries are helping. So, sanctions plus more weapons so that 2023 becomes the year of Ukraine's victory. Western countries should give the weapons that your troops require. You need to ask your officers, your Ministry of Defense about what you need and provide it to you, stated Ainars Latkovskis. Latvia, like other countries, began to accept Ukrainian refugees from the first days of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Since then, about 40,000 people have been able to obtain asylum in this country. And recently, the Latvian government extended the stay of Ukrainian refugees in the country until June 30, 2023. According to opinion polls, more than a third of Italians want their country to actively help Ukraine. Thus, having previously had a rather high percentage of pro-Russian sentiments in society, against the background of the events in Ukraine, Italy was able to change its foreign policy. In early December, the Italian government extended arms supplies to Ukraine until the end of 2023. The package should include the SAMP-T and Aspide air defense systems. Italy will continue deliveries of weapons, as it was before, in terms and ways that we will agree with our Atlantic allies and with Kyiv, Italian Defense Minister Guido Crosetto said in an interview with Il Foglio newspaper. In addition to weapons, Italy also transfers industrial and technological products to Ukraine. According to Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani, Italy sent more than 5 tons of electrical equipment to Ukraine in December, ANSA reports. We donated to Ukraine not only weapons, but also 51 tons of electrical equipment, transformers, converters. We provided a lot of technological tools, as well as military means, the foreign minister said. According to Mariana Saranovich, editor-in-chief of Ukrainian newspaper in Italy, in the first days of the war, the people of Italy were confused, since it was difficult to decide on allies in the country. This explains the hesitation of Italian politicians on the issue of arms or other types of assistance. Most of the public has adopted a diplomatic stance, but some remain attached to the information that has been promoted here for decades. And when the EU decided what the position of the European countries would be, Italy began to unprecedentedly support Ukraine, and there has not been such support for Ukraine for as long as I can remember myself here. The Italians brought a lot of humanitarian aid to collection points, they received Ukrainians in their families. Israel. After the start of a full-scale war, Ukraine's relations with Israel became more complicated. Many attribute this to the fact that the authorities of this Middle Eastern country flatly refuse to provide Ukraine with weapons to fight Russian aggressors, as they are afraid that they may end up in Iran. At the same time, Israel provides Ukraine with humanitarian aid. For example, since spring, 85,000 tactical first aid kits, 4 armored ambulances and at least 15 million tons of medicines and medical equipment have been transferred. In February-July, Israel accepted patients from Ukraine for treatment, including Ukrainian servicemen who were seriously injured during the hostilities. And in May and July, Israel donated several batches of aid to Ukraine for emergency and civilian bodies. 3,500 helmets, 2,000 bulletproof vests, 1,000 gas masks, demoning suits, generators, and air filtration and purification systems. In October, it became known that Israel began to transfer intelligence to Ukraine to destroy Iranian drones. As a military expert, Major of the Israel Defense Forces Reserve Victor Wirth noted, not only intelligence was transferred to Ukraine, but also the means to destroy Iranian drones. At the same time, the Israeli authorities once again refused the request of Ukraine to transfer the Iron Dome air defense systems to it. The problem that the Israeli leadership has is that information about any Israeli military assistance immediately hits the main pages of the Ukrainian media. And our leadership does not really like this, because we are in the situation that the de facto Russian army is located on our northern border, and our almost only international airport is located in the zone of destruction of Russian air defense systems located in Syria. As for the Iron Dome, I do not agree that it is not suitable for Ukraine. It is suitable for Ukraine, as if it was made right for it. But Ukraine needs the Iron Dome in huge quantities, and no one has such an amount, Victor Vert summed up.